Have you ever felt like something is holding you back from being your true self? Like there's a force inside you that keeps you stuck, repeating the same mistakes over and over, never able to break free? It's like you're trapped in a loop, living a life that isn't entirely yours, but something's missing a piece of the puzzle you can't quite find. What if I told you that this feeling isn't something you should avoid or hide from, but something you must confront head-on to truly unlock your fullest potential? Welcome to this deep dive into one of the most transformative psychological concepts ever discovered, the shadow. And no, it's not the typical dark side of you that you're supposed to be ashamed of. It's much more complex and, believe it or not, is the key to unlocking your greatness. Carl Jung, the renowned psychologist, has a powerful theory that could change the way you see yourself and the world. He argues that buried within each of us is a hidden part, the shadow, that holds not only our suppressed fears and flaws, but also our untapped strengths and desires. And today, we're going to take a journey through this hidden world and explore how integrating your shadow can transform your life. But first, before we begin this deep dive, I need you to take a moment and hit that like button if you're excited to break free from old patterns. Hit share so your friends can join you on this journey of self-discovery. And if you're new here, make sure to subscribe so you never miss a life-changing video like this one. We are building a community of people who are ready to face their fears, confront their shadows, and step into their true potential. And hey, if you find this video resonates with you, don't forget to donate a super thank to support the channel and help us create even more content to empower you on your journey. I appreciate your support. All right, now let's talk about the shadow. It's not the enemy. It's the key to everything you've been searching for. Carl Jung, a towering figure in psychology, believed that the human psyche is far more complex than many realize. Deep beneath the conscious surface of our minds lies a vast and intricate world that we often neglect, the unconscious. In this hidden realm, Jung discovered what he referred to as the shadow, a part of the self that most people avoid. This concept, though unsettling, offers profound insights into human behavior and holds the key to unlocking our true potential. Understanding the shadow is not just an academic exercise. It's an invitation to face our deepest fears, desires, and contradictions, which, when integrated, can transform our lives. The shadow represents the parts of ourselves that we reject or suppress because they don't fit the image we wish to project to the world. These can include everything from negative emotions like anger or jealousy to qualities we perceive as unacceptable, such as arrogance or selfishness. The shadow is not inherently evil, though it often carries the darker aspects of our nature. It is simply everything we choose not to acknowledge or accept. Jung believed that these hidden traits don't just vanish. Instead, they continue to influence our thoughts, actions, and even our relationships. The more we try to suppress the shadow, the more it controls us from the unconscious, often manifesting in ways we don't expect. This is where the forbidden law comes into play. According to Jung, until we confront our shadow, we remain trapped in cycles of self-sabotage, fear, and misunderstanding. These cycles are often invisible to us because they operate beneath the surface of our conscious awareness. For instance, when someone repeatedly finds themselves in toxic relationships or stuck in dead-end jobs, it's frequently a manifestation of a shadow's influence. Their unconscious desires and fears are playing out through their actions, even though they may not fully understand why they make such choices. The shadow doesn't need our permission to act. It operates on its own, subtly steering the ship of our lives. Imagine for a moment that you've spent your entire life trying to be the best version of yourself, polite, kind, successful, but deep down, there's a part of you that is angry, resentful, or even envious. You might tell yourself, "I'm not that kind of person," but in reality, those repressed emotions are very much a part of who you are. What happens when you suppress these emotions? They don't just disappear. Instead, they seep into other aspects of your life, often cropping up unexpectedly. For example, you might find yourself suddenly lashing out at a friend or colleague, not because they've done anything wrong, but because you haven't dealt with your own hidden frustrations. The more you suppress, the stronger these repressed emotions grow. This idea of projection is crucial to understanding the shadow. Projection is when we attribute to others the traits, emotions, or desires that we can't accept in ourselves. If you've ever found yourself irritated by someone else's arrogance or selfishness, it may not necessarily be their behavior that bothers you, but rather that it mirrors something you've denied within yourself. Jung suggests that these projections are one of the primary ways the shadow influences our lives without our awareness. We might dislike someone intensely for reasons we can't quite explain, and the more we dislike them, the more we reveal about our own unresolved conflicts. Think about it. Have you ever been frustrated by someone's success or confidence? Maybe a coworker receives praise for an achievement, and instead of feeling happy for them, you feel bitter or envious. In that moment, your reaction says more about your own shadow than about them. Perhaps deep down, you've internalized the belief that self-promotion is selfish, or you've been taught to downplay your own successes for fear of appearing arrogant. That person's confidence may trigger something in you that you've been hiding, something you fear or have been taught to reject. By confronting this emotion, by recognizing it as part of your shadow, you begin the process of reclaiming that repressed part of yourself. Confronting the shadow is a journey, one that requires both self-awareness and courage. The forbidden law that governs our lives is simple. Until you confront your shadow, it will control you. This truth is one that many people avoid because facing the shadow can be uncomfortable and even frightening. But it's only by facing these hidden parts of ourselves that we can experience true freedom and transformation. The shadow isn't just a collection of negative traits. It also contains powerful energies that, when acknowledged, can lead to profound personal growth. Jung's process of individuation is the key to integrating the shadow. Individuation is the psychological process of integrating all aspects of the self, both the light and the dark, into a harmonious whole. When we deny or repress certain parts of ourselves, we fracture our identity. We live in constant conflict between the image we present to the world and the hidden parts of ourselves. But when we embrace the shadow, we stop pretending to be something we're not. We become whole, embracing not only our strengths, but also our weaknesses, fears, and flaws. This process is not easy, and it's not about indulging in our darker impulses. It's about accepting the reality of who we are without judgment or shame. Imagine a person who has struggled with self-doubt for most of their life. They've been taught to be humble, to avoid boasting about their achievements. As a result, they've suppressed their natural confidence. But one day, they realize that this suppression is holding them back. They begin to question why they feel uncomfortable asserting themselves or pursuing opportunities. In confronting their shadow, they come to understand that their confidence is not arrogance, it's simply a reflection of their true self. This realization can be transformative. By integrating the shadow, this person starts to embrace their true power. They no longer feel the need to downplay their abilities. They become more authentic, more self-assured, and more willing to take risks that they previously avoided. Their entire approach to life shifts, and they begin to attract opportunities that align with their true self. The shadow, once feared and suppressed, becomes a source of strength and personal growth. But why do so many people resist this process? Why is it so difficult to confront the parts of ourselves that we fear or dislike? One of the reasons is that the ego, the part of us that seeks to maintain control and order, fears the dissolution of its carefully constructed image. The ego is invested in maintaining a facade of perfection and control, and acknowledging the shadow feels like a threat to that image. But the truth is that it's only by accepting the shadow that we can achieve true psychological and spiritual growth. The shadow isn't just a psychological concept, it's also a spiritual one. Jung believed that integrating the shadow is a form of spiritual awakening. By confronting the parts of ourselves that we've denied, we reclaim our wholeness and move closer to our authentic self. This process of integration is what allows us to transcend the limitations of the ego and step into a more liberated existence. So what does this look like in practice? The first step is awareness. Start paying attention to your emotional reactions. When you feel triggered, whether by anger, jealousy, fear, or even admiration, ask yourself why. What is it about the situation that evokes such a strong response? What parts of yourself are being activated? This process of self-inquiry helps bring the unconscious into the light of awareness, where it can no longer control you from the shadows. Next comes acceptance. This step requires acknowledging that the shadow is not something to be ashamed of. It's a natural part of being human, and it doesn't make you a bad person. Everyone has a shadow, and it's through accepting it that we begin to reclaim our power. Acceptance doesn't mean acting on every repressed impulse. It means recognizing that these parts of ourselves exist and that they are worthy of our attention and understanding. Finally, expression is key. Once you've accepted the shadow, you must find ways to express its energy in healthy, constructive ways. This doesn't mean indulging in destructive behavior, but it does mean being authentic. For example, if you've repressed your ambition, start setting clear goals for yourself. If you've hidden your anger, find a healthy outlet to express it, such as through creative expression or physical activity. By following this process, you will begin to integrate the shadow and unlock the power within. The more you accept and embrace the shadow, the less it controls you. You stop projecting your fears and desires onto others, and you start making conscious choices that align with your true self. The result is a life of authenticity, freedom, and personal growth. Jung's work on the shadow has profound implications for how we live our lives. It challenges us to confront the parts of ourselves that we've ignored or rejected, and it encourages us to embrace all aspects of who we are. The journey of integrating the shadow is not an easy one, but it's the path to true personal freedom. By doing so, we reclaim our power, transform our lives, and ultimately step into our highest potential. The shadow, once feared, becomes the key to unlocking our true greatness. Carl Jung's theory of the unconscious mind has had a profound impact on how we understand human behavior. One of his most significant concepts is the idea of the shadow, a part of ourselves that is hidden from our conscious awareness. According to Jung, the shadow contains all the traits, desires, and emotions that we have repressed or denied throughout our lives. These are not just the negative aspects of ourselves, such as our anger or selfishness, but also qualities that we might have been taught to suppress, such as confidence, assertiveness, and ambition. The shadow is the darker side of our personality, but it is also the part of us that holds our greatest potential for growth and self-realization. From a young age, we begin to internalize societal expectations and learn what is deemed acceptable or unacceptable behavior. We are praised for being kind, obedient, and humble, while traits like assertiveness, independence, and selfishness are often frowned upon. As children, we are encouraged to fit into the mold of what is considered good or proper. Over time, this leads to the suppression of aspects of ourselves that don't align with these ideals. For example, a child who is naturally assertive might be told to tone it down or be quiet because such behavior is deemed disruptive or rude. Similarly, a child who is passionate and ambitious may be told not to show off or be selfish because society values modesty over self-promotion. As we grow older, we continue to suppress these qualities in an attempt to gain approval from others, to fit in, and to avoid rejection. We hide parts of ourselves that we perceive as undesirable, thinking that by doing so, we can achieve acceptance and safety. However, this suppression comes at a cost. These hidden aspects of ourselves don't simply disappear. Instead, they sink into the unconscious, where they continue to influence our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors in subtle but powerful ways. The more we push these parts of ourselves away, the more they begin to control us from the shadows. For example, imagine someone who has been taught throughout their life that being selfish is wrong. They may become so focused on pleasing others and meeting their needs that they neglect their own desires and well-being. Over time, they may develop feelings of resentment, frustration, or burnout because they're not expressing their true needs. These suppressed desires the need for self-care, for personal boundaries, or for recognition may eventually surface in unexpected ways, such as through passive-aggressive behavior, self-sabotage, or feelings of bitterness toward others. Similarly, someone who has been taught to suppress their anger may find themselves constantly bottling up their emotions. This might lead to a situation where they feel increasingly overwhelmed or emotionally distant, unable to express their true feelings or stand up for themselves when necessary. In this case, the repressed anger, instead of being expressed in a healthy way, becomes a force that controls their behavior. The person might become passive-aggressive or avoid confrontation altogether, even when it's necessary for their own well-being. Over time, the suppression of such emotions can manifest in anxiety, depression, or physical ailments, as the body and mind struggle to manage the unacknowledged feelings. This is where the concept of the shadow becomes crucial. The shadow is not just a collection of negative traits or emotions. It also includes all the aspects of ourselves that we have been taught to hide or suppress because they are not considered socially acceptable. These can include our strengths, such as our desire for success, our ability to assert ourselves, or our confidence. We may have learned that these traits are bad or selfish, and so we suppress them in favor of more socially acceptable qualities like modesty, humility, or selflessness. But in doing so, we also lose access to our true power and potential. For instance, someone who has been taught to be humble and avoid boasting might suppress their confidence and ambition, even when they have the skills and abilities to achieve great things. This can result in missed opportunities, as they constantly downplay their achievements and avoid taking risks that could lead to personal growth or success. The shadow in this case is not just the bad parts of themselves, but also the qualities that could help them thrive in life, such as the courage to pursue their dreams and the belief in their own worth. The shadow also influences our relationships in profound ways. Often, the traits that we suppress in ourselves are the same traits we project onto others. This is called projection, a psychological defense mechanism where we attribute our own unwanted qualities to someone else. For example, if we are afraid of being seen as arrogant or selfish, we may become overly sensitive to these traits in others. We might criticize others for being too confident or self-centered, not realizing that we are projecting our own fears and insecurities onto them. This projection can create conflict in relationships and prevent us from forming authentic connections with others, as we are not fully acknowledging our own shadow. Consider a situation in which two people in a friendship become increasingly distant because one feels that the other is overly self-absorbed. In reality, the person who feels this way may be projecting their own suppressed need for attention or validation onto their friend. Their reaction to their friend's behavior is not necessarily about their friend's actions, but rather about their own repressed desires or insecurities. By refusing to acknowledge and integrate these feelings, the person is allowing their shadow to control their perceptions and interactions. The more we reject or suppress parts of ourselves, the more power the shadow holds over us. Jung believed that the shadow manifests not only through our behaviors, but also in our dreams, fantasies, and even physical symptoms. For example, a person who represses their anger might have dreams where they're being attacked or engaged in violent conflict. These dreams reflect the unconscious mind's attempt to bring attention to the repressed anger. Similarly, a person who suppresses their desire for success might experience feelings of inadequacy or self-doubt that are reflected in their waking life through a lack of motivation or fear of failure. The shadow is not an external force, but a part of our own psyche, and it becomes more powerful the more we ignore it. The longer we suppress these parts of ourselves, the more they will try to break through, often in ways that are disruptive or harmful. But here's the paradox. The shadow is not just something to fear or fight against. In fact, it is also the key to our personal growth and transformation. Jung believed that the process of integrating the shadow is essential for achieving a sense of wholeness and self-realization. Integrating the shadow involves confronting the parts of ourselves that we have been avoiding, acknowledging them, and accepting them as part of who we are. This doesn't mean acting on every impulse or indulging in destructive behavior. Rather, it means recognizing and accepting that we are complex beings with both light and dark aspects. By integrating the shadow, we reclaim the power that we have given away through repression and projection. For example, imagine someone who has spent their entire life suppressing their desire for success because they were taught that wanting wealth or recognition was selfish or unspiritual. By acknowledging and integrating this desire, they may realize that it is not inherently bad to want success. In fact, pursuing their goals can lead to greater self-fulfillment and the ability to contribute to others in meaningful ways. By integrating this part of themselves, they can begin to pursue their ambitions without guilt or shame. Similarly, someone who has always been uncomfortable with their anger might begin to explore the underlying reasons for their feelings. Rather than suppressing their anger or letting it build up until it erupts in destructive ways, they might learn to express it constructively. They could channel their anger into action, standing up for themselves or others in situations where they previously might have remained passive. By embracing and integrating their anger, they can use it as a source of strength and empowerment. The process of integrating the shadow is not easy, and it requires a great deal of self-awareness and honesty. It's not about indulging in destructive behavior or becoming overwhelmed by negative emotions. It's about recognizing that all parts of ourselves, even the ones we find uncomfortable or undesirable, are integral to who we are. By accepting the shadow, we stop fighting against our true nature and begin to live more authentically. In the end, the shadow is not something to be feared or rejected. It is a part of us that, when embraced, can lead to profound personal transformation. The more we understand and integrate our shadow, the more we can access our true potential and live lives that are not controlled by unconscious fears and desires. Rather than allowing our hidden traits to control us from the shadows, we can bring them into the light, where they can guide us toward greater self-awareness, authenticity, and fulfillment. When we think about the shadow, we often envision it as a part of ourselves that is inherently negative or undesirable, something that must be avoided or suppressed. However, Carl Jung's concept of the shadow goes beyond merely representing our faults or weaknesses. It includes all of those parts of ourselves that we reject or suppress because we've been taught that they are not acceptable. These can be both positive and negative aspects of our personalities, and they deeply affect how we behave in the world. The most powerful aspect of the shadow is not just its capacity to reveal our flaws, but how it influences us when we fail to acknowledge it. When we fail to address the shadow, we end up projecting it onto others, and this can often create friction and conflict in our lives. Take, for example, a situation where you feel deeply irritated by someone's arrogance. At first glance, it seems like their arrogance is the problem. They come across as overly confident, dismissive, or perhaps even condescending. You may feel the urge to distance yourself from them or perhaps criticize them in some way. But here's the question: why does their behavior bother you so much? Is it really about them, or is it something within you that has not been fully accepted or integrated? This reaction may not be about the other person at all. Instead, it could be a reflection of something within your own shadow. If you were raised to believe that confidence and assertiveness are undesirable or that they might make you appear arrogant or selfish, then you may have repressed these qualities in yourself. When you encounter someone displaying the very traits you've suppressed, it triggers an uncomfortable reaction within you. The irritation you feel is actually a projection of your own shadow, as you see in someone else what you fear or reject within yourself. For example, imagine growing up in an environment where you are constantly told to be modest, not to brag or show off. Over time, you internalize these messages, suppressing your natural confidence or ambition in favor of being humble or quiet. Later in life, when you encounter someone who displays the qualities you were taught to reject, like someone who is outspoken, assertive, or even arrogant, you may find yourself triggered. Instead of acknowledging that you, too, have these qualities within yourself, you project your discomfort onto them, blaming the other person for something that actually lies within your own unconscious mind. This is a classic example of projection, a psychological defense mechanism where we attribute our own unwanted traits to others. When we project our shadow onto someone else, we are essentially blaming them for what we cannot face within ourselves. It's much easier to criticize someone else for their arrogance than to confront the fact that we may feel uncomfortable with our own self-confidence. This projection can cause us to make snap judgments or form biased opinions about others based on our unresolved inner conflicts. Let's consider another example: the irrational fear of public speaking. Many people experience anxiety or fear when they have to speak in front of a crowd, even if they are skilled at what they do. This fear often isn't about a lack of ability, but rather about the fear of judgment or rejection. The shadow is at work here as well. The fear of being judged or not being good enough comes from the part of us that feels inadequate, unworthy, or unprepared for scrutiny. But where does this fear come from? If you were raised in an environment where mistakes were not tolerated, where perfection was demanded, or where your self-worth was tied to external approval, then you may have developed a fear of being exposed or judged. The shadow holds the emotions, fears, and desires that we have repressed because we've been taught that they are unacceptable. When you stand in front of an audience, those fears surface: fear of not being good enough, fear of failing, fear of being ridiculed. This is your shadow manifesting in the form of irrational fear, controlling your behavior and limiting your potential. Until you confront this fear, until you accept the part of yourself that feels inadequate, you will continue to be controlled by it. The more you avoid situations where you might face judgment or rejection, the stronger your shadow becomes. By avoiding public speaking, you may be avoiding the very fear that holds you back from achieving greater self-expression and growth. It's only when you confront this fear head on that you can begin to understand the root cause and integrate this aspect of your shadow into your conscious self. Let's delve deeper into why people often feel irrationally afraid in such situations. Fear of judgment is often linked to a deeper fear of not being accepted, not being loved, or not being good enough. This fear is rooted in early experiences of rejection or criticism, and over time, it becomes internalized. The shadow contains all of the rejected parts of ourselves: our fears, our flaws, and our desires that we've been told are unworthy. When these parts remain hidden, they can control us in subtle ways, guiding our decisions, behaviors, and emotional responses. In the case of public speaking, this might mean that you avoid situations where you might be judged. You might refuse to take on a leadership role at work or avoid opportunities that require you to be in the spotlight. This avoidance may feel like a form of self-protection, but in reality, it's the shadow steering the ship. By not addressing this fear directly, you allow it to control you, preventing you from growing and achieving your true potential. Another example of the shadow influencing our lives can be seen in relationships. Have you ever found yourself in a toxic relationship, repeatedly attracting partners who are emotionally unavailable, abusive, or controlling? You might think that you're simply unlucky or that the world is full of people who aren't a good fit for you. But the shadow can be at play here as well. Our unconscious beliefs and suppressed emotions often attract situations and people that mirror our inner conflicts. If you've spent years suppressing your need for love or validation, for instance, you may unconsciously attract partners who are incapable of providing it. These relationships can be frustrating and painful, but they also serve as a mirror to the parts of yourself that you've neglected. Perhaps you've been taught that you don't deserve love or that expressing vulnerability is a sign of weakness. As a result, you might suppress your true desire for emotional connection, attracting people who reflect those same fears and insecurities. In this case, the shadow is guiding your choices. Your unconscious belief that you're unworthy of love or that intimacy is dangerous might cause you to repeatedly choose partners who confirm these beliefs. This cycle continues until you confront and address the beliefs and emotions hidden in your shadow. Once you begin to accept your own worth and acknowledge the suppressed need for connection, you can break the pattern and start attracting healthier, more fulfilling relationships. These examples demonstrate how the shadow influences our lives in ways that we may not even recognize. The shadow is not just a collection of negative traits or emotions. It also contains parts of ourselves that we have been taught to repress or deny because they don't fit into the socially acceptable mold. These suppressed aspects of ourselves, whether they are desires, fears, or even strengths, can manifest in a variety of ways. Through projections, irrational fears, self-sabotaging behaviors, and toxic relationships. The shadow can also show up in less obvious ways. For instance, someone who represses their anger might appear calm and composed on the surface, but find themselves frequently experiencing headaches, fatigue, or other physical ailments. The body is a powerful indicator of the shadow's influence. Suppressed emotions often manifest physically, as the body attempts to communicate what the mind refuses to acknowledge. Chronic pain, tension, and illness can all be signs that the shadow is at work, storing unresolved emotions and repressed feelings that are waiting to be expressed. The key to understanding the shadow is recognizing that it's not an enemy, but a part of ourselves that needs to be acknowledged and integrated. The more we repress these parts, the more control they have over us. Once we start to face our shadow, we can begin to understand the unconscious patterns that guide our behavior and make conscious choices that align with our true selves. It's important to note that confronting the shadow does not mean indulging in every impulse or desire that we've suppressed. Rather, it means acknowledging these parts of ourselves without judgment and learning to express them in healthy, constructive ways. The shadow contains not only our flaws, but also our strengths, our confidence, our ambition, our ability to assert ourselves. By integrating these parts, we become whole, able to live more authentically and fully. For example, someone who has been taught to suppress their ambition might begin to recognize that their desire for success is not selfish or unworthy, but an essential part of their identity. Once they accept this aspect of themselves, they can begin to pursue their goals with greater confidence and less guilt. Similarly, someone who has repressed their anger might find ways to express it constructively, standing up for themselves when necessary, advocating for others, or finding creative outlets for their frustration. The process of integrating the shadow is not easy, but is necessary for personal growth and self-realization. By acknowledging and embracing our hidden fears, desires, and emotions, we gain greater control over our lives and our choices. Instead of being driven by unconscious forces, we become conscious creators of our own reality, able to live authentically and with purpose. The shadow is not something to be feared. It is a gateway to greater self-awareness, self-acceptance, and personal transformation. Carl Jung's concept of the shadow is one of the most profound psychological insights, offering a way for individuals to understand their deeper, often hidden motivations and behaviors. Jung proposed that every person has a shadow, a part of the self that contains all the qualities, emotions, and desires that we reject or repress, often because they don't align with the idealized version of ourselves or societal expectations. He believed that in order to truly grow and become whole, we must confront our shadow. This confrontation is not just a theoretical exercise. It's a vital, sometimes difficult, process that leads to profound personal transformation. The concept of a forbidden law lies at the heart of Jung's understanding of the shadow. This law dictates that in order to live a truly liberated life, we must face the parts of ourselves that we typically avoid. By choosing to ignore these parts, whether out of fear, shame, or societal pressure, we are choosing to live in ignorance, unaware of the forces within us that guide our actions, reactions, and choices. The shadow operates beneath the surface, quietly influencing us in ways we might not even recognize. But when we refuse to confront it, we allow these unconscious parts of ourselves to control us. One might think that by ignoring the shadow, they are somehow avoiding problems, but in reality, the opposite is true. By not acknowledging it, we let it fester and grow, and it shows up in our lives through irrational fears, destructive patterns, and unexamined behaviors. For example, imagine someone who spent most of their life repressing anger because they were taught that anger is dangerous or wrong. Over time, this anger doesn't just disappear. Instead, it seeps into their relationships, possibly through passive-aggressive behavior, resentment, or frequent outbursts. Without facing the anger head-on and understanding its roots, they may find themselves trapped in a cycle of emotional volatility, unable to break free from these automatic responses. Ignoring the shadow can also mean rejecting our own desires and motivations, particularly those that we deem selfish or unacceptable. Many of us are taught to suppress desires like ambition, selfishness, or even the drive for personal success. While these can be viewed as negative qualities in certain contexts, they're also a part of our authentic selves. If we constantly deny these parts of who we are, we might end up leading a life that feels unfulfilled or disconnected from our true potential. For instance, someone might feel a deep sense of longing to achieve something extraordinary in their career, but because they've been taught to be humble or self-effacing, they suppress this desire, thinking it's inappropriate or greedy. This can result in years of stagnation, simply because they haven't allowed themselves to confront and accept the ambition that lives within them. Confronting the shadow, however, isn't about giving free rein to our repressed emotions or indulging in destructive behavior. This is a common misunderstanding. Facing the shadow doesn't mean acting on every suppressed impulse or emotion in a reckless way. Rather, it's about integrating these parts of ourselves in a way that fosters understanding, acceptance, and balance. It's about recognizing that every aspect of our personality, the parts we admire and the parts we dislike, are integral pieces of who we are. Jung emphasized that facing the shadow is a courageous act. It requires self-awareness and honesty, qualities that are difficult to cultivate, especially when we are taught to hide or deny parts of ourselves. For example, acknowledging feelings of jealousy can be uncomfortable. Many people are taught that jealousy is a weakness or a flaw. But when we acknowledge it as a natural emotion, we allow ourselves to explore why we feel jealous and what it reveals about our needs or insecurities. Confronting jealousy means understanding that it doesn't define us, but rather offers us insight into the areas of our lives where we might feel threatened, insecure, or unsupported. By doing so, we gain the power to address these issues consciously rather than letting jealousy control our behavior in unconscious ways. In the same way, confronting anger doesn't mean indulging in rage or taking it out on others. Instead, it's about understanding why we feel angry, where that anger comes from, and what it's trying to tell us. Anger is often a response to feeling disrespected, powerless, or misunderstood. When we confront our anger, we are able to express it in healthy ways, whether that's by standing up for ourselves, setting boundaries, or advocating for others. Repressing anger, on the other hand, leads to passive-aggressive behavior, frustration, and even self-hatred, as we try to push down emotions that need to be acknowledged. When we confront our shadow, we begin to reclaim our personal power. This is one of the most transformative aspects of shadow work. We stop being controlled by unconscious forces and start living with awareness. For example, if we are constantly reacting to situations without understanding the underlying motivations, we might feel like life is happening to us rather than us shaping it. When we choose to confront our shadow, we take control of our emotional responses, our thoughts, and our actions. We are no longer at the mercy of unconscious fears or desires. Instead, We respond to life in a way that is aligned with our true values and goals. One common example of how the shadow governs our lives is the pattern of self-sabotage. Many people experience cycles of failure, often because they are unconsciously rejecting their own success or self-worth. A person who has been taught to believe that they are not good enough or that success is for others and not for them might find themselves self-sabotaging at key moments. They may procrastinate, hesitate, or make decisions that undermine their efforts. When confronted, this pattern often reveals deeply ingrained feelings of inadequacy or a fear of failure. By acknowledging these feelings and understanding their origins, the individual can begin to address the underlying fears and break the cycle of self-sabotage. Another example of how the shadow can control our lives is through relationships. Often, the relationships we attract reflect aspects of our shadow. If we repress feelings of inadequacy, we might attract people who make us feel unworthy or inferior. If we reject our need for affection or attention, we might end up with partners who are emotionally unavailable or neglectful. This is because the unconscious shadow is drawing us towards situations that reflect our inner conflicts. Once we become aware of this, we can begin to change the way we relate to others. By confronting the feelings of unworthiness or fear that we've been hiding, we can start attracting healthier relationships that are based on mutual respect and authenticity. The process of confronting the shadow is challenging but ultimately liberating. As Jung pointed out, the shadow holds tremendous power, but it is a power that is often misunderstood. When we refuse to acknowledge it, it can become a force that dictates our actions and choices from behind the scenes. But when we face the shadow, we tap into that power in a conscious and constructive way. Instead of being controlled by repressed emotions or desires, we begin to integrate them into our lives, allowing us to live more authentically and in alignment with our true selves. Facing the shadow is a transformative process that requires not just self-awareness, but also a willingness to be uncomfortable. It means accepting that we are complex beings, capable of both light and darkness. Instead of resisting the parts of ourselves that we dislike, we learn to embrace them, understanding that they are just as much a part of our humanity as the traits we celebrate. In doing so, we stop living in reaction to the world around us and start living with intention, power, and awareness. Ultimately, the forbidden law that Jung describes is the law of self-acceptance. By confronting the parts of ourselves that we've been avoiding, we stop letting them control us. Instead, we integrate them, allowing us to become whole and free. The choice is ours. We can continue to live in ignorance, controlled by our unconscious fears and desires, or we can choose to confront our shadow and unlock the full potential of who we are. The process of integrating the shadow, one of Carl Jung's most transformative psychological concepts, offers a powerful path to personal growth and self-realization. At the heart of this process is the idea of confronting the hidden aspects of ourselves that we have repressed, rejected, or denied. These parts of our psyche often reside in the shadow, influencing our behaviors and reactions in subtle yet profound ways. The journey of shadow work is not about eliminating the darkness or pretending it doesn't exist. It is about embracing it and integrating it into our conscious lives so we can become more whole, authentic individuals. The first step in this transformative journey is becoming aware of our emotional triggers. Emotional triggers are powerful reactions that occur when certain situations or people evoke extreme emotions in us, whether positive or negative. These intense emotional responses often hold clues about the parts of ourselves that we have hidden or denied. By paying close attention to our emotional reactions, we can begin to uncover the unconscious fears, desires, and insecurities that drive our behaviors. Take, for example, the emotion of resentment. It's not uncommon to feel resentment towards others who have what we desire or who have achieved success in ways that we envy. If you notice yourself feeling resentment toward a colleague or friend who is more successful, it's important to pause and ask yourself, why do I feel this way? What is it about their success that bothers me? Is it really about them? Or is it about something within me that I have suppressed? In many cases, feelings of resentment stem from a deep sense of unacknowledged desire or unfulfilled ambition. If you've spent years suppressing your own desires for success, whether out of fear of failure, fear of judgment, or a belief that success is selfish or inappropriate, you may find that someone else's success triggers these hidden parts of yourself. You might have been taught that ambition and the pursuit of personal achievement are qualities to be downplayed or avoided. And so you've internalized this belief to the point where you dismiss your own potential for success. In this case, the resentment you feel is not so much about the other person, but about your inability to fully embrace your own ambitions and desires. When we examine these emotional triggers, we begin to see that they often serve as signals from our unconscious, pointing us toward areas that need healing. These reactions are not just random. They arise from unresolved conflicts within us. By paying attention to them, we can start to uncover the hidden parts of ourselves that have been influencing our lives without our awareness. Once we have identified these emotional triggers, the next step in the shadow work process is acceptance. Acceptance is perhaps the most challenging part of shadow work, as it requires us to confront the parts of ourselves that we may have spent years avoiding. It means acknowledging that we are not just the ideal version of ourselves that we present to the world. We are whole beings, capable of both light and darkness, and both aspects are equally valid and important. In our society, we are often taught to focus on our strengths and suppress our weaknesses. We are praised for our achievements, our confidence, and our outward successes, while our flaws, fears, and suppressed desires are shamed or ignored. This leads to a disconnection from the parts of ourselves that we deem undesirable. However, true personal growth comes from embracing the entirety of who we are, including our imperfections. Acceptance means recognizing that the parts of ourselves we have hidden away are just as much a part of our identity as the parts we celebrate. When we learn to accept our flaws, our fears, and even our suppressed desires, we no longer feel the need to hide them or pretend they don't exist. For example, many people struggle with feelings of inadequacy, especially when they compare themselves to others who seem more successful or accomplished. This sense of inadequacy can stem from repressed desires for success or recognition. When we confront these feelings and allow ourselves to accept the fact that we have the right to desire success and achievement, we begin to dismantle the self-imposed limitations that hold us back. Acceptance in this context doesn't mean indulging in unhealthy competition or overinflating our sense of worth. It simply means acknowledging that we have the right to pursue our goals, and that doing so does not make us any less humble or worthy. Acceptance also involves recognizing our darker emotions, such as anger, jealousy, or shame, and understanding that they are natural parts of the human experience. Instead of repressing these emotions, we learn to express them in healthy ways. For instance, rather than bottling up anger or resentment, we might learn to express it through constructive actions, like setting boundaries, speaking up for ourselves, or addressing conflicts directly. By accepting our anger, rather than letting it fester, we take back control over it and use it as a source of strength, rather than allowing it to manifest in destructive ways. Similarly, acceptance means embracing our vulnerabilities and fears. Many people fear judgment, rejection, or failure, and these fears often keep them from pursuing their true desires. Accepting these fears doesn't mean letting them dictate our actions. It means acknowledging that they exist and that they are part of the human experience. By accepting our fears, we free ourselves from the grip of shame or avoidance. We no longer feel the need to hide behind masks or pretend to be someone we are not. Instead, we can act with courage, even in the face of uncertainty, knowing that our fears do not define us. Once we have accepted the various aspects of our shadow, The next step in shadow work is to integrate these parts into our daily lives. Integration is the process of bringing these hidden parts of ourselves into conscious awareness and using them to guide our actions, decisions, and relationships. It's about making the unconscious conscious and allowing our newfound self-awareness to inform our behavior in the world. For example, imagine a person who has long struggled with self-doubt. This person may have spent years hiding their ambitions or suppressing their desire for recognition because they believe that wanting success was selfish or inappropriate. However, through shadow work, this individual has come to accept that their ambition is a natural part of who they are, and they no longer feel the need to hide it. As a result, they begin to take action toward their goals, whether that's by pursuing a new career path, taking on more responsibilities at work, or simply expressing their ideas more confidently. By integrating their ambition into their life, they begin to see opportunities where they once saw obstacles, and they start living a more authentic and fulfilling life. Similarly, someone who has struggled with anger might begin to integrate this emotion by learning how to express it in a healthy way. Instead of letting anger control them through passive-aggressive behavior or outbursts, they might practice speaking up when they feel disrespected, setting clear boundaries, or engaging in activities like physical exercise or creative expression to release pent-up frustration. By integrating their anger, they gain greater emotional balance and learn to use this energy in positive, constructive ways. Integration also involves shifting our relationship with others. As we confront and accept our shadow, we stop projecting our unconscious fears and desires onto those around us. We become more aware of our emotional responses to others, and we begin to take responsibility for our feelings instead of blaming others for how we feel. For instance, if we feel resentment toward a colleague for their success, we recognize that this is our own projection, and we address the underlying issues within ourselves rather than holding the other person responsible. This shift in perspective allows us to engage with others in a more authentic and compassionate way. Through this process of integration, we begin to live more consciously and with greater self-awareness. We are no longer driven by unconscious patterns of behavior or repressed desires. Instead, we make deliberate choices based on who we truly are, not based on the fears and limitations that once controlled us. By confronting the shadow and integrating it into our lives, we unlock our true potential and step into a more authentic, empowered version of ourselves. Personal transformation through shadow work is not an easy process, but it is one that leads to profound growth and self-realization. By becoming aware of our emotional triggers, accepting all parts of ourselves, and integrating the shadow into our daily lives, we become whole. We stop living in reaction to the world around us, and instead, we begin to shape our reality based on conscious choices that reflect our deepest truths. Through this process, we reclaim our power, our authenticity, and our ability to live a fulfilling and meaningful life. When we begin to integrate our shadow, we stop reacting unconsciously to life's circumstances. The shift from being reactive to being proactive is a fundamental aspect of what Carl Jung described as individuation, a psychological process that leads to the realization of our full, authentic selves. In essence, individuation is the journey toward becoming whole, embracing both the light and dark aspects of our personality to live a life that reflects our true essence. Rather than being pulled by unconscious impulses or external expectations, we start to make choices from a place of awareness, grounded in the full understanding of who we are. At the heart of this transformation is the power of integration, the process of bringing the suppressed, hidden parts of ourselves into conscious awareness and allowing them to guide us in a constructive, empowering way. The shadow is often seen as the darker, unwanted side of our personality, encompassing the emotions, desires, and qualities that we have rejected or been taught to hide. But when we integrate the shadow, we no longer allow it to control us from the shadows of our unconscious mind. Instead, we embrace it, accepting that all parts of us, even those we've been conditioned to avoid, are integral to our complete self. One of the most profound shifts that occurs when we integrate our shadow is the ability to take control of our life. For many of us, our lives are often governed by unconscious patterns, repetitive cycles of behavior that stem from unresolved emotional wounds, repressed desires, or beliefs that we've internalized from childhood. These patterns can manifest in various forms: self-sabotage, toxic relationships, chronic dissatisfaction, or a persistent sense of unworthiness. The unconscious patterns are often the result of unacknowledged parts of ourselves, the shadow, that continue to exert influence without our awareness. For instance, imagine someone who has struggled with low self-esteem for most of their life. They might constantly seek external validation, whether through the approval of friends, family, or coworkers, because they don't feel worthy or confident on their own. This person may have been taught to believe that their value is dependent on external praise and approval, causing them to suppress their own sense of self-worth. They might look at others who seem self-assured and successful, feeling inadequate or unworthy in comparison. However, when they begin the process of shadow work, they start to uncover the unconscious beliefs and fears that have been driving this pattern. They realize that their sense of worth is not dependent on others' validation, but on the inherent value they hold as a person. In this example, the process of integrating the shadow involves confronting the parts of themselves that have been rejected: the fear of inadequacy, the belief that they are not enough, the desire for external validation. By acknowledging and accepting these parts of themselves, the person no longer hides from them. Instead, they integrate these aspects into their consciousness, understanding that they are just as valid as their strengths and positive qualities. This acceptance allows them to begin making conscious choices that align with their true sense of self, rather than living according to the patterns of fear and insecurity that had previously controlled them. As the person confronts their shadow, they begin to accept their worth and stop seeking approval from others. They recognize that their value doesn't come from external sources, but from within. They no longer need to prove themselves to others or seek validation through praise. This newfound confidence leads to greater self-assurance, as they stop hiding parts of themselves they once feared. Instead of acting out of insecurity or fear, they begin to make choices that are aligned with their authentic desires and goals. As a result, their self-esteem grows, and they experience a deeper sense of empowerment. This is a clear example of how the integration of the shadow can lead to a profound shift in one's life. Once the person has faced the fears and insecurities that previously governed their behavior, they're no longer controlled by those unconscious patterns. They are free to pursue their desires with greater clarity and purpose. This process of integration doesn't happen overnight, but over time. As they continue to confront and accept the hidden parts of themselves, they move closer to becoming the fullest, most authentic version of who they are. Similarly, the power of integration can transform many other areas of life. Take the example of someone who has spent years in toxic relationships, repeating patterns of emotional dependency, neglect, or abuse. This person may have been taught that love is something to be earned, that they are not worthy of healthy relationships, or that they must sacrifice their own needs to keep others happy. These beliefs are often rooted in the shadow, unconscious parts of themselves that have been suppressed or denied. However, when they begin to work on integrating the shadow, they start to uncover these hidden beliefs and fears. They come to understand that their worth is not dependent on someone else's approval or affection, and that they have the right to be treated with respect and love. Through this process, they stop projecting their own unhealed wounds onto their partners, and instead, they start making choices from a place of self-respect and self-love. They learn to set healthy boundaries, to express their needs honestly, and to attract relationships that are supportive and fulfilling, no longer constrained by unconscious patterns of emotional dependency. They are free to create relationships that are based on mutual respect, trust, and love. By confronting the shadow of low self-worth, fear of rejection, or the belief that they're undeserving of love, they reclaim their power and begin to transform their relational dynamics. This shift is not only empowering, but also freeing. When we live in reaction to unconscious patterns, we feel as though life is happening to us. We feel stuck in cycles of disappointment, frustration, and helplessness, unable to break free from the grip of the past. But when we confront our shadow and begin to integrate it, we take responsibility for our lives. We stop seeing ourselves as victims of circumstances and start seeing ourselves as active participants in our own growth and transformation. For instance, someone who has struggled with chronic anxiety might find that their fears are rooted in unconscious beliefs about safety and control. These beliefs may have been formed in childhood, perhaps as a result of trauma or uncertainty. The anxiety they experience is a manifestation of the fear and control issues held in their shadow. By doing the work to confront and accept these fears, acknowledging that they're a part of their psyche, but not allowing them to define them, the person can begin to integrate this aspect of themselves. They stop letting the anxiety control their decisions and behaviors, and instead, they learn to respond to life with greater resilience and calm. This process of integration doesn't mean that the anxiety will disappear entirely, but the person will be able to approach it with a new sense of self-awareness and control. The integration of the shadow also allows for the exploration and acceptance of desires and dreams that were once suppressed. Many people have passions, ambitions, and talents that they have hidden away because they were taught they weren't good enough or that those desires were unrealistic. Whether it's a desire to pursue an artistic career, start a business, or take on a leadership role, these suppressed dreams often remain in the shadow because they conflict with the person's self-image or the expectations of others. However, when the shadow is integrated, these dreams can be brought to the surface, and the person can begin to take steps toward manifesting them in their life. For example, a person who has always dreamed of becoming a writer might have spent years repressing this desire because they were told that writing wasn't a practical career or that their writing wasn't good enough. These beliefs were internalized in the shadow, and as a result, they never pursued their passion. But through the process of shadow work, they begin to acknowledge that their desire to write is valid and important. They start to overcome their fears of failure and judgment, and they begin to write for themselves, without concern for external validation. This shift in perspective allows them to make the conscious decision to pursue writing, no longer held back by the limiting beliefs that once controlled their life. This power of integration, the ability to break free from old patterns and become more aligned with our authentic self, is what makes shadow work so transformative. It's not a quick fix or a magical cure, but a process of deep self-awareness, acceptance, and personal growth. By integrating the shadow, we unlock our full potential and free ourselves from the unconscious forces that once controlled us. Whether it's low self-esteem, toxic relationships, chronic anxiety, or suppressed desires, the act of facing and accepting the shadow allows us to transform our lives and create a future that reflects our true essence. The concept of a shadow, as defined by Carl Jung, is not merely about confronting the darker aspects of our personality. It is about acknowledging the totality of who we are, embracing both the light and the dark sides, and integrating them into a unified whole. Jung's idea that the shadow is not our enemy, but rather a key to personal transformation, challenges us to rethink the way we view our hidden selves. The shadow holds much more than our fears and flaws. It also holds our untapped potential, the parts of us that we have suppressed, ignored, or feared to acknowledge. It is through the process of integration, by facing the parts of ourselves that we've tried to avoid, that we can unlock the greatest parts of who we truly are. This is the ultimate truth about the shadow. In order to understand the transformative power of integrating the shadow, it is important to first recognize the ways in which we have been shaped by our unconscious mind. Throughout our lives, we are exposed to messages from society, family, and culture that dictate what is acceptable, what is good, and what is bad. As we internalize these messages, we begin to reject certain parts of ourselves, parts that don't fit the mold of what we have been taught to be. We suppress our anger, our desires, our weaknesses, and even our strengths that are perceived as undesirable or selfish. These suppressed parts, which Jung calls the shadow, don't just vanish. They stay hidden, quietly influencing our behaviors, emotions, and choices from the unconscious. Until we confront them, they continue to operate behind the scenes, dictating the course of our lives in ways we are often unaware of. This is where the transformative power of shadow work lies. Shadow work is the process of confronting the hidden, suppressed parts of ourselves. It involves acknowledging our fears, our flaws, our desires, and the parts of ourselves we've been taught to hide or reject. The more we avoid these aspects, the more power they have over us. When we integrate the shadow, we reclaim the parts of ourselves we have been hiding. By doing so, we unlock a new sense of power, confidence, and authenticity. A key aspect of integrating the shadow is realizing that the qualities we have hidden away, our ambition, our assertiveness, our desires for success, are not inherently bad. On the contrary, they are part of what makes us who we are. These qualities, when repressed, can hold us back in life, preventing us from reaching our full potential. Think about someone who has a strong desire to succeed, but has been taught to downplay their ambition, perhaps because they were told that being ambitious is selfish or arrogant. For years, they might suppress their drive, only to find themselves stuck in jobs or situations where they feel unfulfilled. By confronting their shadow and acknowledging their suppressed ambition, they can begin to take steps toward their true goals, building a life that aligns with their authentic desires rather than the limitations imposed by external expectations. When we integrate the shadow, we stop living in the past, repeating old patterns that no longer serve us. For example, someone who has spent their life seeking external validation might find themselves caught in a cycle of self-doubt and insecurity. This pattern is often rooted in childhood experiences where they learned that their worth was dependent on approval from others. As an adult, they may continue to seek validation through their achievements, appearance, or social status. But this external validation never brings lasting fulfillment. When they begin to confront their shadow, the parts of themselves that fear rejection or feel unworthy, they can stop living in the shadow of their past experiences. Instead, they can start making conscious choices that reflect their true worth, independent of others' opinions. Integration of the shadow doesn't just involve confronting and accepting our weaknesses, flaws, and fears. It also means reclaiming the strengths and desires we've been taught to suppress. These hidden strengths are often what we need in order to thrive in life. Confidence, assertiveness, ambition, passion, these qualities, when embraced, can propel us forward into a life that reflects our true potential. When we deny or suppress these qualities, we live inauthentically, constantly seeking external validation or approval. But when we integrate them, we live with intention, creating a life that is aligned with our deepest desires and aspirations. For instance, consider someone who has spent years in a relationship where they felt neglected, unappreciated, or emotionally drained. Perhaps they've sacrificed their own needs for the sake of the other person, convinced that they weren't worthy of love or attention. This pattern may stem from unresolved childhood experiences where they learned to suppress their own desires in order to avoid conflict or rejection. But as they begin to confront their shadow and acknowledge the parts of themselves that were hidden, such as their need for love, affection, and mutual respect, they can begin to make conscious choices about the kind of relationship they want. They stop living in the past, repeating patterns of self-sacrifice, and start creating new possibilities where they set boundaries, communicate their needs, and demand the respect they deserve. When we integrate the shadow, we stop being controlled by the unconscious fears and desires that have shaped our lives. Instead of being ruled by old wounds, we begin to take conscious control of our decisions and actions. For example, someone who has spent years avoiding confrontation because they fear rejection or conflict might find themselves stuck in unhealthy relationships or situations. But by facing their fear of conflict, by confronting the shadow of vulnerability and insecurity, they can begin to express themselves more authentically, setting boundaries and asserting their needs without fear of being rejected. This integration doesn't happen overnight. It is a gradual process of self-awareness, acceptance, and growth. But with time, the individual becomes more empowered, more confident, and more aligned with their authentic self. The integration of the shadow is not just about healing. It is about unlocking your true potential and stepping into your greatness. By confronting the parts of yourself that you have been avoiding, you open the door to new possibilities and new ways of living. When we embrace the shadow, we stop being defined by the limitations of the past. We stop living according to the rules and expectations that others have imposed on us, and we start creating a life that reflects who we truly are. This process requires courage, honesty, and self-awareness, but it leads to a life that is richer, more authentic, and more fulfilling. Think about the way society often encourages people to conform to a certain standard or image of success. Many people grow up believing they must follow a prescribed path, whether that's going to college, working a traditional job, or fitting into a particular mold. But when we confront our shadow, we begin to question these societal expectations. We begin to ask ourselves, what do I truly want? What path is right for me? Not based on what others expect, but based on my own desires and values. This questioning is the beginning of personal transformation. As we step away from the illusions and expectations of the world around us, we start to create our own path, guided by our authentic self. The ultimate truth of shadow integration is that the shadow is not our enemy, it is our ally. It contains the keys to our personal transformation. By embracing the parts of ourselves that we have rejected or denied, we reclaim our power, our confidence, and our ability to create the life we desire. The shadow is not something to fear or avoid. It is the gateway to greater self-awareness, authenticity, and personal power. When we face it and integrate it, we begin to live in alignment with who we truly are, free from the limitations of the past. The question, then, is, will you dare to confront your shadow and reclaim your power? Will you break free from the illusions that keep you trapped in old patterns? When you do, you will not only transform yourself, you will transform the world around you. So, here we are at the end of a journey that could potentially change your life. If you've made it this far, you're probably realizing something profound, that the shadow, the very thing you may have been avoiding for years, is not your enemy. It's your guide. By confronting it, you're no longer being controlled by unconscious fears, old patterns, or limiting beliefs. You're taking back control, embracing the fullness of who you are, and stepping into a future where you are aligned with your truest, most authentic self. The greatest part of this journey? It's just the beginning. The more you confront and integrate your shadow, the more you'll discover untapped potential strengths, desires, and ambitions you've hidden for so long. Imagine living without the constant pull of your past, with the freedom to create the life you've always dreamed of. That's the power of shadow work, and it's within your reach. But here's where I need you. If you felt a shift in perspective today, if something inside you has clicked, do me a favor, like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear this, and subscribe if you haven't already. Don't let this journey stop here. Hit the bell icon so you're notified every time I release new content designed to help you grow, heal, and step into your greatness. And remember, if you want to give back and help this channel grow, you can donate. A super thanks. Your support means the world and makes all the difference in helping me continue bringing you the best content. Now, I want to leave you with a challenge. Will you dare to confront your shadow? Will you step into the unknown, face your fears, and claim the power that's been within you all along? The choice is yours, and I believe in you. Thank you for watching, and I can't wait to see you take the next step on this transformative journey. Until next time, remember, Your greatest self is waiting to be discovered. All it takes is the courage to face what's inside.